You think they will kill me right away? Or do they like to play with their food? Kane Trenton's voice was dry, but the undercurrent of fear couldn't be hidden. He flexed his wrists against the thick metal cuffs biting into his skin. The chain rattled, echoing faintly through the cold, damp cell. Across from him, a shadow shifted. The dim, bluish light of the alien moon streaming through the narrow window barely illuminated the figure. Her silver skin shimmered faintly, the strange markings on her face catching the light. She tilted her head, her large, golden eyes unblinking as she studied him. "Your humor is misplaced, human," she said, her voice low and musical, with an accent that made each word sound like a deliberate choice. "They will not kill you quickly. It is not their way." Kane let out a bitter laugh. "Great. Just what I needed to hear." He leaned his head back against the cold wall, trying to ignore the damp chill seeping into his clothes. His breath was visible in the frigid air. "And you? What's your role in this circus? Let me guess. Chief Priestess? Executioner? Or maybe you're just here to watch the show." The woman didn't flinch at his sarcasm. Instead, she stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound against the stone floor. Now that she was in the light, Kane could see her more clearly. She was tall, her willowy frame draped in flowing robes that shimmered with an iridescent hue. Her hair, long and silken, seemed to float around her as if it had a life of its own. Her beauty was otherworldly, but her gaze was sharp, almost predatory. "I am Tauren," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And I am here because you were not meant to be here." Kane raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? That's news to me. Pretty sure those guys with the spears who dragged me here had other ideas." "The Xarnak do not take prisoners lightly," Tauren said, her tone growing serious. "You are a warrior, yes?" Kane's expression darkened. "I was. Doesn't seem to count for much anymore." Tauren's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she spoke again. "You may not realize it yet, but your presence here is no accident. The Xarnak believe you are destined to appease their gods through sacrifice. They believe your death will bring them favor. But I," she hesitated, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "I do not." Kane snorted. "Well, that's comforting. Glad at least one person doesn't want me dead." "Do not misunderstand me," Tauren said sharply, her voice cutting through his flippancy. "I have no interest in your survival for your sake alone. If you die here, the balance of this world will be tipped in ways you cannot imagine. Your life serves a purpose far greater than you understand." Kane frowned, the weight of her words sinking in despite himself. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Tauren didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the folds of her robes and pulled out a small, crystalline object. It glowed faintly, pulsating with an inner light that seemed almost alive. Kane's eyes were drawn to it, and he felt an inexplicable pull, as though the object were calling to him. "This is the Nexus Shard," Tauren said. "It is a fragment of an ancient power, one that the Xarnak seek to control. They believe it grants them the favor of their gods. But they are wrong. The shard is not a tool for their petty rituals. It is a key." Kane's brow furrowed. "A key to what?" "Freedom," Tauren said simply. "For you. For me. For countless others enslaved by their cruelty. But to use it, I need your help." Kane laughed again, though this time it was tinged with disbelief. "You need my help? Lady, I'm chained up in a cell. Not exactly in a position to save the world." "You underestimate yourself," Tauren said, stepping closer. She knelt in front of him, her golden eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "The Xarnak chose you for a reason. They see you as a symbol of strength, of resilience. That is why they fear you enough to sacrifice you. And that is why you are the only one who can help me." Kane shook his head, frustration and confusion warring within him. "This is insane. I don't even know what you want me to do." "You will," Tauren said. She placed the Nexus Shard into his hand, and the moment his skin touched it, a surge of energy coursed through him. It was like fire and ice all at once, filling him with a strength he hadn't felt in years. His eyes widened as he looked at Tauren. What just happened?" "The shard recognizes you," she said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. It has chosen you, just as I have. Before Kane could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Talron's expression hardened, and she rose swiftly to her feet. The guards are coming, she said. We must move quickly. Will you trust me, Kane Trenton? He hesitated, the weight of the shard in his hand a reminder of how surreal this all was. But the determination in her gaze and the faint flicker of hope stirring within him pushed him to a decision. Let's get out of here, he said, his voice firm. Talron nodded, a glint of approval in her eyes. Then follow me. And whatever happens, do not let go of the shard. With that, she moved to the cell door, her slender fingers working quickly to unlock it with a small device. The door creaked open, and Kane stepped out, the weight of the Nexus shard in his hand and the promise of freedom ahead driving him forward. The journey had only just begun. The corridor outside the cell was dimly lit, the walls slick with moisture and covered in alien glyphs that glowed faintly in the dark. The air was heavy with an acrid smell that made Kane's nose wrinkle. Talron moved with practiced ease, her steps silent as she led him down the passageway. Kane followed closely, his senses on high alert. Where are we going? He whispered. The lower chambers, Talron replied without turning around. There is a hidden passage there that will take us out of this fortress. But we must hurry. The Xarnak do not take kindly to escape attempts. Kane tightened his grip on the shard, its faint glow a comforting presence in the oppressive darkness. You seem to know a lot about this place, he said. You've done this before? Talron glanced back at him, a shadow of a smile on her lips. Not quite, but I have spent many cycles studying their ways. I know their weaknesses. Before Kane could press further, a guttural roar echoed down the corridor, followed by the sound of heavy boots pounding against the stone floor. Talron's expression tightened. They found us. Run. She didn't wait for a response. Turning sharply, she sprinted down the corridor, her robes billowing behind her. Kane cursed under his breath and took off after her, his muscles protesting the sudden exertion after days of confinement. The shard in his hand pulsed with energy, and he felt a strange strength coursing through his body, pushing him forward. They rounded a corner and came to a large chamber filled with strange, glowing machinery. Pipes and cables snaked across the walls and floor, and the air hummed with the sound of alien energy. Talron didn't hesitate, weaving through the labyrinth of equipment with practiced ease. Over here, she called, her voice barely audible over the noise. Kane followed her to a small hatch set into the floor. Talron knelt and pressed her hand against a panel next to the hatch. The glyphs on the panel lit up, and the hatch opened with a hiss. Down, she said, gesturing for Kane to go first. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the corridor they had just come from. The sound of pursuit was growing louder. Gritting his teeth, he climbed into the hatch and began descending a narrow, spiraling staircase. Talron followed, closing the hatch behind her. The staircase seemed to go on forever, the air growing colder and damper with each step. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous chamber lit by the faint, bluish glow of bioluminescent fungi. The walls were rough and uneven, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the space. Talron moved to a large stone door set into the far wall. She placed the Nexus shard into a circular indentation in the door, and the markings on the door lit up, casting intricate patterns of light across the chamber. With a low rumble, the door began to open. This way, Talron said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. She stepped through the doorway, and Kane followed, his heart pounding. On the other side of the door was a narrow tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. Talron took the shard and handed it back to Kane. You'll need this, she said. It will guide us the rest of the way. Kane looked at the shard, its glow steady and reassuring. He nodded, gripping it tightly. Let's keep moving. As they made their way through the tunnel, the sound of the Xarnak pursuit grew fainter, but the tension didn't leave Kane's body. He couldn't shake the feeling that their escape was far from over. What happens when we get out of here? He asked, his voice low. Talron glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Then the real fight begins. The tunnel seemed endless, its walls slick with condensation and faintly glowing with streaks of bioluminescence. The further they ventured, the more Kane's apprehension grew. His grip on the Nexus shard tightened as its steady pulse resonated through his fingers, providing a small measure of reassurance. "Tauren," he began, his voice cutting through the faint dripping of water. "You said the shard is a key. A key to what, exactly? And what do these Xarnak want so badly that they're willing to sacrifice people for it?" Tauren didn't slow her pace, her movements graceful and deliberate as she navigated the uneven ground. "The Xarnak worship their gods with an obsessive fervor," she said. "They believe that by offering powerful beings to the void, they gain favor and power. But the truth is far more insidious. The Nexus shard is not just a key. It is part of a much larger mechanism, one that can tear open a rift between dimensions." Kane frowned, his mind racing to make sense of her words. "Dimensions? You're saying they're trying to open what? A portal?" "Precisely," Tauren said, her tone grim. "But it is not a portal to their gods. It is a gateway to an ancient prison. Long ago, my people sealed away a great and terrible force, one that could consume entire worlds. The Xarnak believe they can control it, but they are blinded by their arrogance." Kane swore under his breath. "And you're telling me they're using people like me to power this thing?" Tauren nodded. "The ritual requires a convergence of energies. The sacrifice of a strong, resilient spirit, one like yours, amplifies the shard's power. It is why they chose you, Kane Trenton. But it is also why you are the only one who can stop them." Kane let out a hollow laugh. "You're putting a lot of faith in a guy who's just trying to stay alive." Tauren stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her golden eyes bore into his, filled with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You underestimate yourself," she said. "You have endured much and survived against impossible odds. That strength is not just for your sake. It is for this moment." Before Kane could respond, the tunnel widened into a massive cavern. The ceiling stretched high above, studded with glowing crystals that cast eerie, shifting patterns of light across the rocky walls. In the center of the cavern stood a towering monolith, its surface etched with the same alien glyphs that adorned the shard. Tauren approached the monolith cautiously, her movements almost reverent. "This is the threshold," she said. "It is here that the Xarnak will attempt to complete their ritual. But the shard in your hand can also disrupt their plans." Kane frowned, glancing between the monolith and the shard. "What do I have to do?" Tauren's expression was somber as she turned to him. "You must merge the shard with the monolith. It will unleash a pulse of energy that will destabilize the rift before it can fully open. But be warned, once you begin, the Xarnak will know. They will come for you." "Of course they will," Kane muttered. "Why would this be easy?" He stepped forward, his heart pounding as he stared at the monolith. The shard in his hand pulsed more strongly now, its glow intensifying as he neared the towering structure. He could feel a strange energy coursing through him, a mixture of fear and determination. "Let's get this over with," he said, raising the shard toward the monolith. The moment the shard made contact, the glyphs on the monolith lit up in a cascade of brilliant light. A deep, resonant hum filled the cavern, growing louder with each passing second. Kane felt a surge of energy rip through his body, and for a moment, he thought he might lose his grip. Tauren stood at his side, her gaze fixed on the monolith. "Hold steady," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "The energy will stabilize soon. Do not let go." Kane gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as the shard seemed to pull him closer to the monolith. The light grew brighter, filling the cavern with an almost blinding radiance. And then, a deafening roar echoed through the cavern. Kane turned his head just in time to see a group of Xarnak warriors charging into the chamber. Their twisted, hulking forms moved with terrifying speed, their weapons gleaming in the crystalline light. "Tauren!" Kane shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We've got company." Tauren didn't hesitate. She stepped in front of him, her hands glowing with a strange, ethereal light. "Focus on the shard," she said. "I will hold them off." Before Kane could argue, She unleashed a wave of energy that sent the first wave of Xarnak warriors flying backward. The air crackled with power as she engaged the attackers, her movements fluid and precise. Kane forced himself to turn back to the monolith, his heart racing. The shard was vibrating in his hand now, its glow almost too bright to look at. He could feel the energy building, the air around him charged with an almost electric tension. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Come on." The hum of the monolith reached a fever pitch, and Kane felt a sudden, overwhelming pull. He cried out as the shard seemed to sink into the monolith, its light spreading across the surface in intricate patterns. And then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the energy erupted. A shockwave rippled through the cavern, knocking Kane off his feet. The Xarnak warriors were thrown backward, their weapons clattering to the ground. The light from the monolith dimmed, and the glyphs faded into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Kane pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He looked around, his eyes searching for Talrin. She was kneeling nearby, her silver skin glowing faintly in the aftermath of the energy pulse. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Talrin looked up at him, a faint smile on her lips. "The rift is closed. For now." Kane let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through him. But as he looked at the fallen Xarnak warriors and the darkened monolith, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was only temporary. "What happens now?" he asked. Talrin rose to her feet, her expression resolute. "Now, we prepare. The Xarnak will not stop, and neither will we. The fight is far from over." Kane nodded, a newfound determination settling over him. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever.